Hi, friends. It's good to rest. We all need to rest. But how do we do this as Christians? All right, well, let me tell you a story. I was reading this interview, and the interviewer was interviewing a bunch of little kids. And the question was, what do you think your mom does while you're away at school? And so one little boy said, well, first of all, she gets us up for school. And in this case, he came from a large family. So she gets all of us up and makes sure we're dressed and cleaned and have breakfast. And then she's packed the lunch the night before. And then she sends us off to school. And meanwhile, she's also getting my dad off to work too. And then while she's away, she cleans the house and does the dishes and does all the laundry and feeds the dog and then goes grocery shopping and prepares a snack for when we get home and is working on the meal for the evening. That's a lot, right? And so the interviewer said, okay, what do you think that your mom wants most? And the little boy, without hesitation, says, she wants to go back to bed. And this, how perceptive that is of a little boy to see that. He sees that there are days when all that mom wants to do is go back to bed. I don't know about you, but I have those days. There's days when, even when I get out of bed, I don't want to get out of bed. Just knowing all that I'm going to be facing in the day. There are days too when I'm halfway through the day and I just want to go home and go to bed. I'm tired, And you probably have similar experiences in that regard. And they could be many things. We could be physically tired. We could be emotionally tired, psychologically tired. We can be also spiritually tired. We can be tired relationally. There can be people who just wear us down. So there's all types of tired. But what to do with that? Specifically, does Jesus address that? And of course, like all things, he addresses every human condition that we could find ourselves in. And I'm thinking of Luke's gospel, where Jesus comes and first heals Peter's mother-in-law, and then word gets out about him, so he heals a lot of other people, and then he goes off to a deserted place to pray. So here's Peter's mother-in-law, and she's probably a pretty busy person, and she's probably pretty indispensable, and probably Jesus sees that. And so before they head out, to really start their ministry, and he's going to call Peter to be with him, and Peter has a wife, and he's going to be leaving that wife behind, and the mother-in-law. And Jesus does him a favor. He goes into the house of Peter, where the mother-in-law is, and he heals her. The gospel writer tells us that she's afflicted with a severe fever. And severe fevers, in Jesus' day, they don't have aspirin or other things to take that fever down. They have to sweat it out, and they have to live it out, or they don't continue living. So it's probably a pretty serious condition. And Jesus comes, and what does he say? He rebukes the fever. He says, leave her. And the fever leaves her. And what does she do? Like that mother and that boy in the story I just told, she pops right up and she immediately begins to wait on all of them. Beautiful. In fact, if you've been watching The Chosen on YouTube, there's a scene where Jesus comes and heals Peter's mother-in-law, and she does just that. As soon as she wakes up, she looks at Jesus and says, "Who are you?" Because she doesn't know who he is. And she gets up and serves her guest. A busy woman. You and I live extremely busy lives, hectic lives, and we are torn. We're torn by the many protocols we have to follow, the many policies, the many expectations that others place upon us and that we place upon ourselves. The many jobs and duties and responsibilities and roles that we have in our work and in our family and other relationships and in our society. It can be exhausting, right? We got to let Jesus come into the fever. A fever that, if we don't let him take it down, it's gonna ruin our minds. It's gonna ruin our hearts. It's gonna ruin our lives. We gotta let Jesus come into the fever and rebuke it and say, leave. But how do we do that? I mean, the first part is the obvious part, and that is to recognize that Jesus recognizes our need, and to let him come into our houses, into our lives, and do what he wants to do. Just like he shows, I want to heal your mother-in-law, Peter, and so that she can continue on doing what she does and is so indispensable and so important. And Jesus sees all the stuff that we do, and he knows it's important to us and it's important to other people. So he's not going to negate that. He's not going to destroy that. He's just going to take the heat down. How does he do that? Well, the next part of Luke's Gospel, chapter 4, is that other people begin to notice the healing power of Jesus. And so many other people come to Jesus. And Jesus, he heals them, one after the other, the crippled and the blind and those that can't hear and so on. He heals them all. But then notice what he does for himself, is that he goes off to a deserted place and he prays and he rests. He goes off in the night to a place where there's no one else around, and he communes with the Father. And he rests his spirit. He rests his body by being away from people and all the demands upon him. He probably gets a good night's sleep and some good quality time of prayer. He rests his mind. He rests his emotions. He addresses his weariness. Remember, Jesus is not just fully God, he's fully human. And so he's susceptible to being tired, just like you and I. And so what is he doing? He's modeling for Peter and all the others, saying, listen, if you're going to follow me, and if you're going to live the life that I'm calling you to live, then you're going to have to really follow me. It's interesting that Jesus really is showing us what his own Father commanded us to do, right? So one of the 10 commandments is that we honor the Sabbath. And in honoring the Sabbath, what Yahweh taught his people, Israel, to do was not just to go to worship him, like later to go to temple, or us, to go to church. Yes. To spend that seventh day, that Shabbat, that Sabbath, that Sunday for us, to spend that day worshiping him, but also notice what is a part of that day of the Sabbath. It was also called a day of rest, where the Father commanded, and now Jesus is modeling a day of rest, a period of time in which we don't do all the stuff that we do. And here's a big reason why. It's a human reason, but it's also a divine reason. It's a human reason because if we don't, we will, to use a modern phrase, burn out. We'll just physically or emotionally or psychologically and also spiritually, we will exhaust ourselves. And then all the things that are important to us and that are important to other people we won't be able to do, or we won't be able to do well. And we won't be able to do the way we should be able to do it, We'll do it begrudgingly. We'll do it with an exhausted approach or an attitude that is less than stellar, right? And it will come across in all the relationships that we do and all the work that we do. And this can happen to a priest. When a priest gets exhausted, he could raise his voice, or he could do things hastily, or he could do things in a way that dismiss other people simply because he's tired, not because he's evil. So if it can happen to a priest, it could happen to any of us. Parents and how they relate to their kids, or kids and how they relate to one another, or employers and how they relate to their employees, and leaders in our society, and so on. So there's a human part here, that the day of rest was a day just to simply give ourselves rest, but also there's a divine part in that it reminds us that we're not God. That only really God can go 24/7 and does go 24/7. But even He rests on the seventh day in order to model what is necessary for us so that we don't play God. And that's what Jesus is doing. After healing all these people, He goes off on His own in order what? To recommune with God. Even though He's God, He's fully human too. So He recommunes with His Father. And His Father pours into Him. And His Father gives Him all the stuff that He needs to do what? To get up the next day and to go to other towns and to spread the good news. And that's exactly what Jesus does. And that's exactly what you and I can do. And that's exactly what Jesus is calling you and I to do. Is to take, yes, the Sabbath, Sunday, as a day of rest. And in that rest, to rest physically in our minds and our hearts and our relationships, but also to rest spiritually and to rest in God spiritually. And not then to live as if all the world depends upon God. All the world depends upon us. Not to live as if all the world depends upon us. But to pray as if all the world depends upon God. Because indeed it does. And then learn to live as if all the world depends upon God. Because it does. And taking periods of rest like that, and not just on the Sabbath, but at the end of a day, or getting up in the morning before every crazy thing starts to dawn in our lives. Taking periods even throughout our week when we rest. And remember, I'm not God and not everything depends upon me, but I need to lean into God upon whom everything depends, including my own life depends. And I've got to give myself that spiritual rest and that physical rest so that, like Jesus, the Father, the Spirit, could send Jesus out to continue to work. And it's the same with you and I. As we work to provide for our families and for our churches and for charities and people who we need, as we work to provide for ourselves, as we do the work of Christians, a world that desperately needs Christians to be on their game, to be optimal, to be resting in God, and to be communing with God, and to be able to be sent out by God. Maybe part of the reason why the world is in the shape that it's in is that all of us, including Christians, are working 24/7. And maybe that's why it's fracturing. Until next time, friends. And I hope you get some rest between